Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. Well, it is Election Day here in the U.S. I'm optimistic, but like everyone else, I'm too scarred by 2016 to take anything for granted. This morning, I dug up the picture that I posted the day after that election of the last page of Italo Calvino's novel, Invisible Cities. Back then, I'd been, well, like everybody else, I was whomped by Trump's election, wondering why I was wasting my time with a project like this podcast, what it meant to promote books and art and have conversations with culture makers when the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And that next day, on a long walk with Amy, I remembered Calvino's words and figured that probably would serve as a mission statement for why I do what I do, which has expanded beyond the podcast into the newsletter, art, zines, the book I'm trying to make, and other stuff. It's kind of interesting to me that, that was only 4 years into making the podcast. It was 2016. I'd started the show in 2012. And, I don't think I could have imagined where everything had gone in the past 8 years of my life and in the world. Anyway, here is what Calvino wrote. It's a dialogue between Kublai Khan and Marco Polo, who's been exploring the cities of the Khan's empire. The Khan said, "It is all useless if the last landing place can only be the infernal city, and it is there that, in ever-narrowing circles, the current is drawing us." And Polo said, "The inferno of the living is not something that will be. If there is one, it is what is already here, the inferno where we live every day, that we form by being together. There are two ways to escape suffering it. The first is easy for many. Accept the inferno and become such a part of it that you can no longer see it. The second is risky and demands constant vigilance and apprehension. Seek and learn to recognize who and what in the midst of the inferno are not inferno. Then make them endure. Give them space." A teacher of mine in high school gave me that book when I was a senior, and it meant a lot to me. And as you can see, it still does. Anyway, that is all I'm going to say about that this week. God knows what next week's show is going to be like, what the world's going to be like, etc. So let's get to the conversation. Now, my guest this week is the artist and activist Eric Drooker. Eric's got a new graphic novel out now from Dark Horse Books called Naked City, and it's an absolute joy. Naked City is sort of a bohemian fable about art and life in New York City. And the lead characters are a young singer-songwriter who's just come to the city to try and make it, and a painter she ends up modeling for, and the city itself. There's also a window washer, and Eric will tell you about him. And there's a few other side characters, like a street dancer and a few others who intersect and interact with these people in their lives. And, well, anyway, the characters all kind of weave around each other, and they're trying to live in a world that is increasingly inhospitable to art and artists, especially contemporary New York City. And Eric does this gorgeous job of playing out the highs and lows of their stories. And more importantly, he brings the city to life. He shows us how the singer sees her new home, how the architecture conveys and shapes the mood of the people who live in it, and how the landmarks, give our lives meaning, how they form these sort of lodestars for us, and how we can find oases among the concrete and the tenements and the office buildings and everything else. And Naked City's an absolute wonder. It's fantastic because, well, Eric's previous full-length books were wordless graphic novels, they were images that managed to convey the entire story without any text. And this time, he's using word balloons, thought balloons, captions, the whole gamut of that style of comic storytelling. And seeing him explore that stuff is fantastic. Seeing the way he melds that with the wordless at times shows you that this is an absolute master of comic storytelling. Now, Eric has always been an artist of New York, and Naked City reaffirms that. You know, he makes poetry out of the built world of the city and the moments of grace we find within it. And Eric being Eric, his political activism is never far from the surface. And it's conveyed maybe in more subtle ways than his previous books like Flood and his shorter works in World War III Illustrated and some of his other comics, as well as his covers and illustrations. But I want to say, speaking of World War III Illustrated, we recorded this episode in an apartment above the Museum of Reclaimed Urban Space on the Lower East Side in Manhattan. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for this one, but I mention it for a couple of reasons. First, it's an amazing space that tries to capture some of the history of this part of New York City. And also because they had an exhibition on site about the latest issue of World War III Illustrated, which is one of the great progressive comics anthologies out there. It's lasted for decades now. It's produced some really important work. It's co-founded by past guest and pal Peter Cooper. Anyway, it all adds up to a kind of special episode of the show, one that I figured was fitting for Election Day. Honestly, I have 4 different episodes I could have gone with for this week, and I thought of just going apolitical, literary, and realized, Eric might be the best show to post. Not that any of you are going to listen on Election Day, but it's me and where I am right in this moment. So I enjoyed the heck out of Naked City. It is a tour de force of comic storytelling. It'll bring New York City to life for you. It'll give you some hope about the nature of art and what it means to try to make it as an artist in this day and age. Anyway, as caveats go, like I mentioned, we recorded in an apartment on the Lower East Side. There was no desk or table, so we held the mics by hand the entire time, and that leads to a little variation and some static on the channels and a ton of outside noise. But honestly, it felt really New York. It's like the first time I recorded with Drew Friedman, and we did it at the 2nd Avenue Deli in Manhattan. And it was just dishes clattering and Yentas in the booth next to us and the whole thing. And it was just very Drew. This one, same way. I sampled out as much of it as I could, but, it's very much an Eric Drooker Lower East Side conversation. Anyway, here is Eric's bio from the book. Eric Drooker's drawings and posters are a familiar sight in the global street art movement, and his paintings appear frequently on the covers of The New Yorker. Born and raised in New York City, he began to slap his images on the streets as a teenager. Since then, his reputation as a social critic has grown and has led to countless editorial illustrations for The Nation, The New York Times, The Progressive, and more. Eric's first book, Flood, a Novel in Pictures, won the American Book Award, followed by Bloodsong. His graphic novels have been translated into French, German, Italian, Korean, Portuguese, Spanish, and Turkish. After designing the animation for the film Howl, he was hired by DreamWorks Animation. His art is in the permanent collections of many museums, including the Whitney, the Museum of Modern Art, the Brooklyn Museum, and the Library of Congress. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Eric Drooker. Tell me about Naked City, man. Where did it start and how did it evolve?
That's a good question. And I didn't start calling it Naked City till I was practically finished with it. The working title for a couple of years there was Street Song, because the protagonist, the young woman, is a musician, and she starts out playing music on the street and down in the subways before she she's discovered one evening. And then she's not making much money at first, and she gets this job as a model working for this artist who wants to paint her. And I thought, okay, Naked City, there's that 1945 book by Ouija, book of photographs, Naked City. I guess Ouija coined that term, but it's been used. In 1948, there was a film noir, that crime black and white flick called Naked City. And then there was even a TV series in the late 50s. There are 8 million people in the Naked City, 8 million stories, and this has been one of them, right? But so this, I'm really goofing on that, because this is literally, it's a story about naked people and nudity and all the implications of that. And then the story kind of evolved by itself. I imagine a lot of authors or novelists say this, that I'm not sure really where it came from. The characters appeared first. The first character to arrive was the window washer, the dude with the squeegee, the aggressive squeegee man. But he's actually quite gentle, we discover by the end. You just don't want to get him mad. But he was the first character that I came up with some years ago. I thought it would be really interesting to tell a story through the eyes of someone who washed windows, old school, who came down on the cable, washing windows of office buildings, one window at a time, and what they must see during the course of the day. You know, dozens of windows, and each window, they see things by accident, maybe things that they shouldn't have seen. Mm-hmm. So that was the original idea, but it ended up veering off in a whole different direction. And the protagonist ended up being this 18 or 19-year-old woman from Detroit, I guess she was. She hitchhikes from the Midwest, comes to the big city. So most of it is through the eyes of a young woman. And then the painter, I suppose, is the comic relief in an otherwise pretty serious story.
What was it like working with dialogue? Your 2 full-length works before this are wordless. At least the 2 that I know of are wordless.
Yes, it's true. The previous, and I'm calling it a trilogy now. The first 2 volumes of the trilogy don't have any words at all to speak of. So this is a departure to use word balloons and captions and the full vocabulary of the comic strip. The vocabulary I suppose I was drawing from on the first 2 books was less comic strip or comic book. It was obviously sequential art, but I was real influenced when I was really young by Franz Massaril. Sure. And Lind Ward, his American counterpart. I couldn't have been more than 11 or 12 when my grandfather came down from the Bronx one day. Whenever he visited, he would always give us books. He was always like giving out books, usually art books. And I remember one day he said, "Eric, take a look at this. It's a whole story, big, long story, without any words in it. The whole story is told in pictures." And I said, "Hey, that's kind of cool. I've never seen that before." Not only was it told in pictures, but they were weird pictures. Yeah. They were these woodcuts, a series of woodcuts, but hundreds of them in sequence. Franz Massaril, who was a Belgian expressionist, he's often grouped with the German expressionists, but he was most active in the 1920s and 1930s, and he would do these woodcut novels. He did a whole series of them. And they were long out of print and out of fashion when I was 12. When was this? In the 1970s? But my grandfather was always turning people on to cool stuff like that. And he also turned me on to Lind Ward, who was an American who was also influenced by Franz Massaril. And he did a whole series of these wood engraving. Engravings are technically a little different than wood cuts. Yeah. But we could get into the details of that later. Yeah, getting into the weeds here. But so that was the idiom that I was really aspiring to, like a sequence of woodcuts. I wasn't working in linoleum or wood. I was using scratchboard, but it gives a similar effect. Rather than gliding over the surface with a pen or a brush, you're scratching into the surface with a blade, with the razor. You're drawing with the razor blade. So it's a very visceral way of working, and it's a subtractive process. In other words, the ink is already there.
Yeah.
And you're removing it. You're scratching it off. And it lends itself to expressionist themes or political themes. So many of the street posters I've done in the neighborhood over the years were using that scratchboard technique, just because it has this really what would you say? I mean, it just looks really handmade.
I don't want to say primitive, but the handmade's a better
jagged, kind of unfinished. The husk is like corn on the cup, but the husk is still kind of there. Mm-hmm. The new book, Naked City, is more traditional. This was pen and ink, and this is a book where I was kind of letting go of that earlier aesthetic and just the tragic themes, because I realized, hey, life is already tragic, especially in these last 6 or 7 years. Shit is all fucked up now. If I'm going to be telling a story now, I want it to at least be funny.
Yeah.
Right? Why add more bleak tragedy or gravitas to an already dead serious situation? So I decided that this one would be a comedy, or at least a tragic comedy. And this one would have words in it. There'd be word balloons, captions, thought balloons, the whole, all of the tools
the idiom
from the comic strip.
Yeah.
Why not? Why not? I'd been kind of holding it at bay all these years. I suppose it's partly an experiment, those earlier books. I wanted to challenge myself and see how much of a story, how involved of an actual novel can I write without resorting to any words at all. And I found that you could go pretty far, right? I mean, do the math. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
There it is. So if you do a book of 300 pages, that's 300,000 words.
Again, getting the Robert Caro comparison. I'm just kidding. But
Robert Caro, yeah, that guy's always on my reading list.
When you've got that 1,100-page thing to worry about, but yeah.
Now, he was from the Bronx. He's a native New Yorker, right?
Yeah, I know I just watched a documentary a couple of weeks ago, too, about him and Robert Gottlieb, and I'm blanking on where he actually grew up. He's a New Yorker, but I just forget which borough.
My mother is born and raised in the Bronx. So when I grew up in this neighborhood right here on Avenue B and 14th Street, about 5 blocks away from where we're sitting now. But we were always going up to the Bronx to visit the grandparents and the grandfather, who was always giving books on every occasion. So that was the major influence. If you were going to be asking me, what are your influences? It's really just the city itself, growing up in this neighborhood, and also going up to the Bronx and just seeing everything in between, all of the extremes, all of the different strata of society, from like super wealthy uptown, and then you go to Midtown, and then you keep walking south, and you go south of 14th Street, where we are now, and it's a whole
get weird.
Different culture, and it's way more unpredictable down here. And it was way more unpredictable back then when I was coming of age here. It was Loisaita, which is the New Yorican word for Lower East Side. At a certain point, landlords started referring to it on their maps as the East Village. They tried to rebrand the neighborhood, because Lower East Side, that smacks of Jacob Riis and photographs and people sleeping on the fire escape and on the
The
roof.
whole tubercular vibe.
Yeah, all of that. And the Ashcan School of Painters, all that stuff. And that's way out of fashion. Landlords prefer the abstract art, something abstract that they could hang up on the vestibule of their building that won't have too much content in it. But yeah, it was the Lower East Side when I was growing up. That's what this was. And the Village was way on the west side. But now, if you look at a map, like a subway map of New York City, this is called the East Village, and the Lower East Side is way down below Delancey Street.
Yeah. When I mentioned to my wife I was coming to Lower East Side to record, she just said, "Oh my God, really?" And then I looked on the map. I'm like, "Well, to us, it's a Lower East Side,
Yes.
but yes, this is pretty close to Stuytown and not far from."
Yeah, a stone's throw from Stuytown.
Yeah.
And of course, Stuytown and this whole area, this was in the 19th century. This was the gas house district.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other story.
Yeah, which again could be a graphic novel about old New York at some point, if it turns from a trilogy into a tetralogy.
Yes.
But
There was the Gas House Gang, the notorious Gas House Gang, which was the most infamous of all and feared of all of the gangs in the mid-19th century. That's the era of gangs from New York.
Yeah.
The 5 Points and all that.
Right.
But the most feared gang was the Gas House Gang that was here. That was like from 12th Street to about 22nd Street, from the river up to, about First Avenue or so. It was really along the east side.
so why'd you leave New York?
Well,
If it's not too personal to ask.
I didn't really leave. I do a lot of back and forth, but
I'll say your area code when you called was a California area code, so
right,
that's
right, that's right. Well, hey, you have to pay extra for the 212 area code.
hip.
man. Everyone's got like a 916 area code.
917.
No matter 917, wherever they're living in.
Yeah.
No, but
What took you from the city?
why
I guess?
why did I ever think that I could escape?
Got the
Well,
eye patch, the escape from New York.
It was foolhardy to think I could. My signal to leave town was when Rudolph Giuliani was re-elected mayor. The first time it was sort of like a trial period, like, the public didn't realize what they were getting into. Sort of like the public, the election was stolen, they didn't realize. But then when the guy gets re-elected, I said, okay, I'll see you guys later. I've born and raised on the east side of Manhattan. I always kind of liked the Bay Area. I got some friends out there. I think I'll go over there for a few months and just see till this thing blows over. And then I've been bi-coastal ever since. Oh.
Yeah. I was going to say, you mentioned the squeegee man earlier, and I know from my history, Giuliani and the squeegee men was not a
Yes.
the street squeegee men were not a good couple. Since
He
he had
really
the whole
went
let's
kind of
kill them, and
scapegoated
that'll stop
them.
people from squeegeeing. And
Well,
yeah.
remember Giuliani, he had the quality of life crimes
Right,
that
yeah.
he had, like public urination, jumping over subway turnstile, and then aggressive squeegee men. The guys who were so desperate that they go out, all they own is a squeegee.
and then try and
And
get
as
you
they're
a traffic
driving,
light and just
you stop at a red light. Windshield is perfectly clean, thank you. But the guy comes up with the rag and the squeegee, and he goes, "That's okay. It's on the house." Those guys, I always noticed those guys since I was a kid, and I thought, "Whoa, I'd like to tell a story, from that guy's point of view." Especially when Rudolph Giuliani started scapegoating the aggressive squeegee men. Like, this is what we really have to fear. Everyone is supposed to be frightened of these squeegee men, and he really zeroed in on them. Yeah. So that's I guess the genesis of that character, who in many ways kind of is the secret hero of Naked City.
I will say, hearkening back to the question about word balloons and integrating a lot of comics vocabulary, I have to say the most affecting parts of the book are still the wordless ones. You still bring it when it comes to wordless storytelling. It's not like the book solely relies on, now we're going to have a lot of explication. You still bring a lot bring out so much through the visuals and the artwork. I'm thinking
trying
especially
to-
of the closing part, but we won't talk about that. So
Yeah, we don't want to give too much of it away, but it's true. Of the 5 chapters, the first 4.5, it's all people talking, and there's dialogue, and you know, all of the tools. I even use captions here and there. But then by the end, I guess those last, I don't know, 50 pages or so, I had words, but I eliminated them. I think when it's wordless, when it's silent, there's something more. What would you say, Gil? Is almost a more emotional, or it hits you on a different level. It's not that language part of the brain, and it's more interactive. Yeah. You're
engaging with it. Yeah,
you have to spend more time kind of almost decoding what the image is saying.
So how comfortable did you get with adopting those modes of storytelling? I know, well, like I say, the ending, becomes its own Drooker-esque section, but
getting back to my wordless roots.
But yeah, what was it like for you? Just learning
was a
different
curve.
mode.
It was definitely a learning curve.
Yeah.
And getting confident with, and even drawing the empty word balloons.
Yeah, just knowing how to
thing.
space things are different.
Spacing them out, because I thought, hey, they're kind of in the way. There's some of these word bubbles. I had just drawn this beautiful tenement with all the fire escape, the steps just right, and now that's going to be overlapped, with the big old word balloon. And pretty soon I realized, no. You pencil it in, and you don't ink it in until after. You fool.
Still learning how to make comics at this age.
Still learning about the word balloons. It was I was kind of what do they say, reverse engineering it. But as I was learning about using verbal language, because the picture language is also a language, I suppose.
It's still writing, but it's go on.
Yeah, it's like maybe the Merriam-Webster's 3rd or 4th definition. Any system of symbols could be called a language, but it's certainly not verbal language. So it was slow, and I realized at a certain point, hey, I'm recapitulating my childhood, because I was very slow on the uptake when it came to reading and writing. Mm-hmm. There's always some kid in the class who's not getting with the program. It took me a really long time to learn how to read. Yeah. And I was real quiet as a kid, as a 7-8-year-old kid. I was real quiet, just. The adults were always a little concerned about me, the teachers, all the authority figures. Well, I don't know what we should do about Eric. He was just there again in the corner, just very quietly drawing pictures, very strange pictures, but he wasn't saying very much. So there's that I feel like is just, I guess, must be part of my my way of communicating is. Visually, I feel like pictures are my native tongue. Yeah. And even if you want to, use, recapitulate human evolution, not to get all Yuval Noah Harari on you, Gil, but 30, 40,000 years ago, before he had any written language, we were already drawing pictures on the walls of caves then. And in fact, we were really good at it. 30, 40,000 BC, we already were, if you look at that work on the walls of Lascaux, France, or Spain, it's already as modern as anything Picasso or Jean Moreau was doing. It's totally, they got it down to just the few essential lines, it's extremely modern. So I'm also exploring some of those themes in the story. The painter in a couple of dream sequences goes back in time, and he's drawing these bison or cave paintings, and I always felt very close to those guys. Mm-hmm. The guys back then, we don't know. I mean, we don't really know the circumstances. It's a wild guess. What do they say in the textbooks or the art history books? At the very, very beginning, they all start the same way. Before,
Caves and Altamira.
Yes, before they even show any Egyptian art or hieroglyph, the very first page, the frontispiece, there's some primitive cave painting from the walls of some cave, Lascaux or something like that. And since I was a child, that always jumped out at me. I always just felt an emotional connection with whoever those artists were. They always say, well, this was obviously some form of early primitive hunting magic, right? The hunt, because we, hunter and gatherers.
Evoke it by actually
But who
representing
the fuck? They don't. 30,000 years ago, I don't think we have a clue where people. Yeah, maybe it was some type of primitive hunting magic, but for all we know, all of those cave paintings throughout Europe and Africa could have all been drawn by some secret cult of Neanderthal teenage girls. The only ones permitted, or the only ones who had the skills and the chops to draw pictures on the wall. It's all guesswork, And the more that we're discovering now through the DNA evidence about Neanderthals, they actually were doing a lot of these. They used tools, they buried their dead, etc. So it wouldn't surprise me if they were drawing pictures on the walls of caves.
And so you found a new art mode.
Yes, and of course graffiti. Growing up in the era, coming of age in the 1970s, and being a part-time graffiti writer myself. Whenever I was drawing on the tiled walls of the subways, I always went back in time to drawing on the walls of caves. What seems to be the problem, officer? No, I'm just doing my job. I've been doing this job for the last 30,000 years, Your Honor.
They never fall for that for some reason.
Yeah, no, somehow they never seem to grasp what I'm getting at.
Where'd the street art begin for you?
Vandalism, as far as we're concerned. It's quality of life crime.
But where did street art start for you?
Let's see. What was it, first examples of street art?
But was there either something you saw that I got to start doing this, or was it just
It's interesting, because I was that generation when there was the mushrooming of graffiti art on the subways. In my childhood, there was always some graffiti and, writing on the walls, everything from pray to fuck you was on the walls of the subways. And, those were the most ubiquitous things. But you didn't really see people's initials and wild, colorful graffiti that really started to kick in the early 70s, and it caught on really quickly. Before then, it really was just a very sporadic thing.
Kilroy was here.
Kilroy, that kind of thing, or someone loves so-and-so, or, for a good time, call 260-2036. But I guess the most common was just fuck you and pray.
Yeah.
And the subways, all through the 70s, that word pray was carved right into the wall.
Yeah.
And every single subway car. And you'd go through, you'd be in the IRT, the BMT, the L train, Canarsie line, whatever car you were on, you realize, hey, pray is written in every. It's not that someone wrote them on most of the subway cars. All of them. Someone systematically went around writing that. So this leads me into my first, or one of my first forays into doing street art myself. When I was a good bit older, I guess I was about 19 years old, I hadn't seen too much stencil art yet. I'd seen one or two examples and went, hey, no one's doing that yet. You could cut a stencil with an X-Acto blade and go out at 2 a.m. with a can of spray paint and just hit them up all over the place, very efficiently. Walk from the east side to the west side, which is what I did. I got a couple of cans of purple spray paint. I don't remember if I actually paid for them or not in the hardware store, but I think it was Krylon was the brand. And I started out, I guess it was Soho. I think they were calling it Soho by then, and the West Village. And I was walking around with a stencil cut silhouette of someone with an umbrella, very mysterioso. Yeah. Just like a profile of someone with an umbrella. Even the gender was a little
Indeterminate.
Indeterminate. That's the word, Gil. He was the person.
I was an editor.
He was a person of indeterminate gender. All you know for certain is that it was some humanoid, shadowy figure holding an umbrella and moving like rapidly in one direction. It looks like they were maybe running or something. But so semi-abstract, but kind of very cryptic. If you're gonna hit an image without any text.
Yeah, you want something that arrests but doesn't actually explain itself.
Make it real mysterious. Yeah. Keep them guessing. Make it cryptic. Make it really poignant. So I started spraying. And it was, I guess they were about 10 inches high, each one. So it wasn't weren't life-size silhouettes or anything like that. They were bite-size. Each one would take me about 5 or 10 seconds. And I'd look over my shoulder to make sure there weren't any cop cars or anything, because they bust you for graffiti. And I hit up all of West Broadway, and then I guess I crossed through Washington Square Park, hit a couple of purple umbrella people under the arch in Washington Square Park, about eye level, kept walking through the West Village up Fifth Avenue. I guess I took a right turn on 8th Street and just walked east through the East Village, spray painting these purple silhouettes of mysterious umbrella people along the way. And I got a few hundred of them that first night. I think I only went out on 2 or 3 occasions. And then I felt like I had really saturated the neighborhood. You don't want to overdo it.
Yeah.
Keep it mysterious. Always leave them a little hungry and always keep them guessing. But it was labor intensive and it's stressful because you're always having to keep your eyes peeled. Ideally, years later when I started wheat pasting posters on the streets, I learned the hard way that you always want to have someone
spotter.
Yeah, someone whose job it is just to be looking around to make sure there are no police coming or any irate citizens walking in your direction. But this is before I learned that. I was solo. I was just going around with the purple cans. And when I went out a week later, I noticed that someone had crossed one of them out, like very violently with a big fat black magic marker, a big X through it. Like they were canceling my umbrella person, like decades before canceling was a thing, you know? And then I said, well, I wonder what that's all about. And then I got to the next block, and again,
another X.
Someone had X'd it right out. Wow. And then I went, well, don't they realize how labor intensive that was? I was risking arrest and worse, spray painting these umbrella people 2, 3 in the morning, and then again an X. And I walked around Lower Manhattan, and some mean-spirited someone who obviously hated art and the arts had X'd every last one of them systematically. He'd gone around like reverse the East Village, then walked down Fifth Avenue, under Washington Square Park, and down through West Broadway, Xing out every last one of them. And I was kind of bitter about it because, you know, you build something when you're a kid, you build something out of blocks, you spend half an hour.
Kid comes over, just knocks them off the
all
table.
It takes is someone to just, 2 seconds to knock it all down. That's where I learned about politics, how difficult it is to create or build something, but then some destructive or someone with a violent impulse could completely undo, 100 years of history in 2 seconds. They're just blowing it up or kicking it over or crossing it out with a black magic marker. And it wasn't until about 40 years later that I discovered who the culprit was. I was a young teenager, an 18-year-old kid from Brooklyn named Jean-Michel Basquiat.
Yep.
Years later, I learned, and he even had a whole alibi. No, man. When I cross something out or X something out, I'm drawing attention to it.
Okay.
All right. Of course, when I learned this, he had already left the stage. I mean, he split when he was. Wasn't he 27?
Yeah, he hadn't turned 30.
He was Hendrix's age, Jim Morrison and Janis Joplin's age. He joined that 27 club. But yeah, I'm like exactly the age of Jean, and we have lots of mutual friends and lovers in common. And I would see his footprints. He would do Samo.
Yeah.
You know, before he went into the galleries.
Yeah, there was a tribute mural to him when I was walking over
right here. I always thought that his most, and especially Keith Haring's most interesting work was when he was doing it on the streets. Yeah. I thought he definitely lost his mojo when he started drawing it indoors on the walls of galleries. I thought there was something real poignant when he would just come to these just marker drawings, just
that was
down in the subway or on the street.
That was it. It was the subway ones where the ad blocks were before the ads go in, right. Where Haring was just drawing those, and
that was his golden age.
They're going to disappear a day later, but
and I guess his golden age only lasted maybe a year or two, because right around him and Jean and Kenny Scharf kind of got into the Fun Gallery here on 10th Street, a couple of blocks from here, invited them in. And I saw that exhibit, and I thought, whoa, that's kind of strange to be seeing this kind of street art in the context of a gallery. It's not nearly as, it's not, there's nothing transgressive about it.
It's not vital.
Yeah. And it's completely legit. Yeah. It's dangerous if you're doing it on the street. First of all, it's illegal. They were taking a risk, especially Jean, being a black man, was taking a risk drawing on the walls of anywhere. And in fact, by 1983, when Jean was just starting to get into the galleries and get his Samo tag off of this, he stopped doing that, was when this other drop dead handsome let's see, Jean, his father was Haitian, his mother was Puerto Rican, but there was another young man exactly our age from Brooklyn named Michael Stewart, who was an artist and sometimes did street art. And he got busted right here at the L train where you came out of the L train, and the cop said, "Hey, what are you doing there?" It's 1983, and there were no other eyewitnesses. All we know is that there were 5 cops, and there was this one young man. I guess this is when we were about 26 years old, and he was then next thing we knew, his family knew, he was in the hospital in a coma and never regained consciousness. Yeah. And so a lot of us took it very personally because we had so much in common with Michael Stewart. He was local, he was an artist, we were all the same age. And of course, Jean took it real personally because he was also black. That was the thing. That's why he didn't survive. And I don't know if you saw an exhibit, but Jean did a piece, a kind of a painting on the subject, a tribute to Michael Stewart that he gave to Keith Haring, and that Keith Haring had it on the wall above his bed when...
I think that's in Brad's biography. I think there's an inset or picture of it.
It could be. It could be. Yeah. So anyway, sometimes I blur all of these things together because it was all going on concurrently, But in all of my stories, but especially in Naked City, I'm trying to weave in a lot of autobiographical details, just about growing up, not only growing up in New York City, but actually growing up in this neighborhood, that's gone through so many radical changes in recent years. In the last couple of decades, it's really become a different animal, I feel like. And I guess that's to answer your question earlier. Why did you leave? Whatever made you think you could escape? I just was by the millennium, I was feeling like a stranger in my own neighborhood.
Sure.
The landscape had changed so dramatically, and the cast of characters had changed, and just the whole complexion of the people in Tompkins Square Park had changed so dramatically that I almost didn't recognize the place. Felt like I had the rug pulled out from under me. So I felt like, what are the other contributing factors? When Allen Ginsberg died in 1997, right near the end of the millennium, and then Rudolph Giuliani got reelected. That was also a signal to leave town. Allen Ginsberg, who was like a fixture right here in the neighborhood. He lived right on 12th Street between 1st and A. And he was just always very accessible, very encouraging to young artists. And when he disappeared, I felt like, well, what's there to hold me here anymore? And I can't go into Tompkins Square Park because that's curfewed. At midnight, they kick everyone out, which had never been done before in history. Tompkins Square Park, the Lower East Side, we're just getting started then. Right. We're just waking up around midnight, stumbling out of bed and having our morning coffee around 1 a.m. And that was what started, that was in the wake of those riots we had in the late 80s and early 90s. I'm sure you heard about the Tompkins Square Park.
My entire
riots.
life has been spent 25 years away from here, so all my news is always New York news. But sitting down with Stan Mack earlier this year when they collected the real life funnies and a lot of the eviction riots and the protests, as well as Tompkins Square Park, these were ugly ass times for New York and for the brutality of the police and the attempt at turning this into something that
the mask was off, and we realized that, the hard way, that we were in the vanguard of that type of militarized policing. When they came here on 13th Street,
with a
couple of blocks to evict the squatters from north side of 13th Street. And Rudolph Giuliani was just elected the first time, just as a show of force and shock and awe. He showed up with a tank, it turned out to be a Korean surplus tank, but painted as if it was a giant police car, painted blue and white. I might be including this in the slide. I'm giving a couple of slide lectures this week. I'm going to be giving a slide lecture in Tompkins Square Park next Saturday. But I have photos because you can't really describe it. If Seth or I did a drawing of it, no matter how realistic it was, it wouldn't be convincing. You have to see a photograph of this thing, a giant blue and white tank with caterpillar treads and the turret and everything like that. And it wasn't until decades later, like in Ferguson, Missouri, after Michael Brown was killed, that the police showed up to quell the riots, and they showed up in a big tank. Yeah. And the U.S. media, they actually did. They should have flipped out, but they didn't really flip out enough. But they did show pictures. It was newsworthy that, whoa, look at this. The police showed up, and this looks like a military vehicle that the riot police are using now.
I've told the story before on the show, but I once went to my local police department. I had a identity theft thing. I had to give a report. Cop comes in. Now, I live in the woods. It's a spread out, but essentially small town, suburban New Jersey. And a cop comes in dressed like he's coming back from Fallujah, full giant vest, 3 clips Velcro to his chest, a Glock. I'm like, dude, it's fucking Ringwood, New Jersey. What is possibly going on that you're going to need to, I got to unload clip after. Nothing happens here, but we militarized the cops. We made them,
And it's sort of too late now. I think police departments around the country have automatic weapons. They look more like military men from the Middle East.
But this is basically Mayberry.
Than they do policemen. you don't even recognize. Excuse me. Excuse me, officer. I didn't recognize you. Yeah. I thought it was the 101st Airborne from Iraq.
Thank you for your service. Yeah,
it was bad enough as a kid with the friendly neighborhood policeman twirling his baton. That was freaky enough. Officer Joe Bolton was already coercive enough. Thank you. So anyhow, all of these things, I tried to put into the mix of this story, Naked City, including, especially Tompkins Square Park. Yeah. I don't know if you recognized it, but in the middle of the story, when Isabel wanders into the park that one spring day, she doesn't know where she is. Hey, this is kind of lovely. How did I never notice this place before? It's an oasis of green on the Lower East Side. And that's why the riots were we gave such pushback, because they were trying to close the park in the middle of a long, hot summer of 1988. But this is the neighborhood's living room. Well, where are we going to go? Yeah. This is it. This little patch of green Yes, we're here for our health. And there was old Polish ladies would be out there, old Jewish men playing chess at the table with 16-year-old punk rockers drinking beer. That was the other unusual thing about this neighborhood. Not only the ethnic, cultural mix, but even age-wise, I always took it for granted that I always got along, hung out with my grandparents and different uncles and different generations have so much to learn from each other. But where I go somewhere else, I'll go to Philadelphia or Boston, Los Angeles or some other city, or Berlin or anywhere, and typically people are just with their own age group.
Yeah, every scene is its own
demographic. Its own scene,
Yes.
It's people hanging out with the people from their own demographic, but at least from their own age group.
Yeah.
Even if they're going to be very multicultural about it.
But we're all 35 years old.
Like in Williamsburg now, it's a somewhat mixed scene, but they're all about the same age. The Lower East Side, especially in Tompkins Square Park, well, like I said, you would have these 16-year-old punk rockers hanging out, sharing a bottle of beer with some 75-year-old babushka, Ukrainian shopping bag lady in the park, and we all knew each other by name. And I think this was the very thing that they were cracking down against when they were shutting down the park. They weren't just shutting it down; it was because real estate was complaining to the mayor, Koch, at the time, and complaining to the local police department that it was just creating, we were an eyesore in the neighborhood.
Blight.
A blight, urban blight, whatever. It's always the same, there's always
They've got
excuse.
their terms of art for this stuff, yeah.
It's just it's suppressing the price of real estate. We could be charging 10 times as much if all of the, this element wasn't out in public view like that. We'd be able to rebrand it the East Village and call it luxury housing, even though it's the same tenement buildings that my great grandparents moved into. But no, they'll give it a paint job. They'll put a new sink in, maybe a little new porcelain or something, and instead of being $150 a month, it'll be what? $3,000 a month, $6,000 a month. So, which is another reason why I left New York for a while. Who can afford it?
Yeah, especially Manhattan.
Manhattan. It's true.
It's spiraled out of control in a lot of respects. When did the political enter your world? And when did it become part of your art?
When did I become conscious of it?
Yeah,
right?
When was the awareness?
Notice it? I guess it had a delayed effect. It came right at the beginning, growing up right on 14th Street, which is kind of the crossroads of two worlds. So I saw a lot of these, shall we say, social contradictions up close in my face. And I didn't have any political analysis or social analysis when I was 4, 5, 6 years old. But I noticed that there were these extreme, just these extreme examples of human behavior and different types of people. You look in that direction, that person, it looks like they're quite well off and they're getting into their own vehicle, and look, there's someone they have a chauffeur driving for them, and but right next to them is someone like fast asleep on the sidewalk. Are they asleep or are they dead? It wasn't so clear. Yeah. I guess the homeless issue didn't really start to kick in to high gear till much later, till like 1979, 1980. This is my memory of it. Mm-hmm. There's so few people in New York who are actually born and raised here that people think, but you've always had a homeless population in New York, right? No. In fact, no. My memory of someone growing up in Lower Manhattan is that, there were first of all, we didn't call them the homeless. It was, look at that bum, on the Bowery, literally on 3rd Avenue. There were always, winos passed out. And then there'd be an occasional shopping bag lady, as we called them. Someone mentally disturbed woman just carrying a shopping bag through Midtown Manhattan, screaming at the top of her lungs. was always mysterious what she was carrying in the shopping bag. We learned years later that inside the bag was many, many other shopping bags all folded up. But my memory, it went something like this, and it happened very suddenly. Yeah, we had some bums down on the Bowery and those shopping bag ladies and, occasional junkies nodding off. But it was around the very end of 1980, John Lennon was assassinated in front of his apartment on 72nd Street. And then a few weeks later, Ronald Reagan is inaugurated president of the United States. And he immediately went after the unions, busted the Patco unions, started at the top. He's like Thatcher was busting Margaret Thatcher was busting the coal miners union. But concurrently, Reagan was busting like white collar, highly skilled unions just to send out a message that he's going after the unions. This is a new era. We're now in the neoliberal era. Lennon's out, Reagan's in. It's all about deregulation and privatization. And we've been kind of in that downward spiral ever since. That's just the way I perceive it. And then within a few months, he was shutting down the mental hospitals all over the country, just cutting back. There's no money for mentally disturbed people. They should pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. And then within the next year or so, you saw, Dan, there's like lots of Bowery bums and shopping bag ladies all over me. I had to climb over a few shopping bag ladies just to enter my apartment this evening. And then, Gil, my memory is that by the end of 1980, 81, there is an occasional editorial about the homeless problem. And then after a couple of years in Reagan's second term, they dropped the homeless, but it was just an occasional reference to the homeless. Like this was this class of people, like a permanent underclass, like they have in India. There's the Brahmins, and then there's
your fixed castes.
These fixed the untouchables, and they've always been with us, and it's almost very Orwellian of it. People seem to think that there's always been the homeless crisis in New York and in the other big cities, but we had a homeless crisis, in the 1930s during the Great Depression. Right. People were camped out in Tompkins Square Park, right, and there were shanty towns along the East River. But no, and then things were very affluent, and everyone was unionized, and then through the 1950s and 60s. And by the late 70s, when you had all the stagflation, and that's when things were starting to get funky, and the whole infrastructure of New York City was coming apart at the seams. Of course, it was a really fun time to be a teenager, because you could literally get away with murder back in the 1970s. Everything is broken. Yeah. There's shards of glass everywhere.
We joke that the Warriors was a documentary, not a
pretty much. And no one was really paying attention anyway. There were no cameras. There were no cameras anywhere. That was another Orwellian thing that just appeared in the early 80s in Reagan's first term, and it all started out, hey Gil, did you see when we were in the bank there, the Chase Manhattan Bank? Yeah. But did you notice in the corner there was like this? Yeah, it was like a camera mounted right in the corner, just looking out at the whole room. A camera just looking out at anyone who entered the bank. And then within a few years, every bank had cameras. In fact, every business, every bodega had at least 2 or 3 cameras, one on the front, one on the back. And now they're so ubiquitous that they don't even look like cameras. It's just like a little round, shiny thing. And you just assume that we're being surveilled all the time, 24/7.
And you talk about doing street art back then. Everything you were able to do.
That's right. Yes.
You would have just been caught the next day when they would have said, we saw him on his entire path.
Yeah, just be careful. Just look over your shoulder. Look both ways, and then hit the marker, but look over your shoulder. If you can, have someone be the lookout for you, so you could concentrate on your art.
But now
and have
you're on CCTV all the time.
And you never know. It's that panopticon effect. Yeah. Right? Like, you don't know. Maybe this particular street corner doesn't have a camera yet, but you don't know that. We all have to assume that we're being videotaped all the time, and that every email or text we send is being recorded by the government. That's the other thing that was forgotten when the Edward Snowden revelations, which is old school now. That was what, 10 years ago that came out. The big revelation wasn't that hundreds, thousands of people are being surveilled by the government. No, it was like prey in the subway. What Snowden was saying is that everyone is being followed, every single email. Yeah. He was saying that it was 100% back then.
Right.
He was saying
total
every
information
electronic,
awareness. That was the Bush era thing.
The total information awareness.
Yeah.
Program or project, and I think they even used the Illuminati
they had the pyramid
symbol.
They had the pyramid for it. They just fell right into every trope possible.
Right on in time for the 21st century.
Yeah, just nuts. But that's why I send postcards out instead. I just figure I may as well, whatever I'm going to write to the world, I should just make it public.
I love it. There's something downright subversive about writing a postcard now.
In fact, I got to get your mailing address so I can send you some.
Yeah, so you can send me some
as well as my
postcards.
zine and some other stuff.
How much is a postcard stamp these days?
They are, I think, 59 cents a piece. I just had to buy 2 rolls of 100 because I finally ran out of my last postcard set. I literally every single day write a postcard to someone and send it out. I also get international postage occasionally. It's about $1.70 to send outside the U.S. But you know, I make the jump. My friends from the U.K., it's like $4 to send me a postcard. Whoa. Yeah, I got this one pal who I met, who follows me through the show, who sent like 8 or 9 postcards in a month. I looked at the postage. I'm like, wait a second. It's like $4 a piece. Okay, I appreciate it, but you know, it's okay to send an email at that point.
Incredible.
Don't bankrupt yourself.
And people are making a real point of it because for free they could just be emailing you where you get it instantly. But
there's like we were talking about the handmade thing,
or Robert Caro writing it out by hand, and Allen Ginsberg, who he would all his poetry was written longhand. Yeah. When he was younger, when he had a scholarship to Columbia University, and I think Howl, the first chapter of Howl, he typed on an old Underwood, and then he said, fuck it. And then the Moloch chapter, he just wrote longhand, and he just thought it was a more fluid style. And then his poor secretary would have to decipher Allen's handwritten scrawl. Yes, but back to just bringing it back home to comics and the most recent graphic novel. There is something very old school to it, right? I mean, we're certainly in a golden age. The whole form of not comics, but of graphic novels, 300-page graphic novels.
I'm still willing to go with comics. You and I are old enough to go with comics for the catch-all description.
That's right. That's good. That's good enough. Yeah. Graphic novel, that's a little too hoity-toity for us. You know? It's that they're handmade in an era when people could just be doing it on, well, I guess some of them are drawn on Photoshop. But if you're drawing it with a stylus, that's still the artist's hand. Yeah. Is in evidence. Yeah. I think we're only in trouble as a culture when we start allowing the machines, the computers, to start doing the art for us, and then there's not really any evidence of the human hand, and it's all completely artificially generated. But that hasn't really quite kicked in yet.
I think people have tried, and yeah, I'm totally with you. I took up drawing a couple of years ago, which I talk about incessantly on this fucking thing. But it was my realization. I've never tried on the computer. It's just the interaction of the hand, the pen, and the paper.
The paper, that it's wood pulp. It could be papyrus paper. You know, some of the high-end art supply stores, you go into Uptown, or Dick Blick might even carry it now. Dick Blick, the McDonald's of art supply stores. McArt Supply Store. Soon they're just going to, they bought out all of the Utrecht art supply stores. Dick Blick. Soon it's just going to be Dick.
You don't know what you're in for.
At the rate they're going. But you could buy, for instance, I think imported from Egypt, papyrus from a papyrus tree. And that, if you want to get a sense of what paper, I think the word paper comes from papyrus.
It's a show that's going to air around the time of yours with a guy named Roland Allen. He did a book about the history of the notebook from, throughout history. And apparently papyrus washes off too easily. Like the actual papyrus, you can actually clear off ink or whatever the impression is.
Permanent.
Yeah, it's not paper. And that was his apparently the realization when I think it was the Chinese first and the Italians picked up on it, started making actual paper and binding it, that turned into, you can create a permanent record of whatever the fuck is going on, whether it's business or your art, and that turned into drafts and everything else that jumpstarts the Renaissance.
Wow. Yeah, I'd be curious to see this book.
It's a real fascinating book. I'll zap you later.
Yeah, let me see that, because I mean, that's a problem for ancient Egyptians who are doing hieroglyphics, but then it's not permanent. Then a few years later, it kind of rubs off.
Yeah,
or
it can be erased.
Ancient Rome. You want it to be. You're a monk, bent over, giving yourself curvature of the spine like your friar tuck. You want the thing to last a few decades, a few generations. You don't want it to just start fading like invisible ink. But yes, I would just draw this conversation back to what you're doing lately, like drawing with your hand on paper, pen on paper, or a brush on paper, or any evidence of the human hand. Because I think we're starting to get into this dangerous territory where we're just texting and we're not. I mean, it'd be one thing if, let me text that motherfucker, but I'll write this person. I'm gonna snail mail her just because it's more romantic. I'm gonna snail mail her. But then when your girlfriend dumps you through text. Right? It's bad enough when she tells you over the telephone, like, Gil, we need to talk. Yeah. No, I still want to be friends.
Yep.
I love you. I'm just not in love with you. You want to hear it from her voice in real time over the phone. That's bad enough. You don't want her texting you this.
Honestly, it's the same thing about us doing this in person, man. Like pre-pandemic, I only did these in person. With the pandemic, I had to start lockdown and all that. I had to start doing remotes. It's just audio, but we're talking on the browser, on a screen. We're not seeing each other's faces. It's not like Zoom or Teams or anything, but it's still distant. And you're still goofing around on the internet while you're talking to someone, as opposed to you and me. Yes, we're distracted by all the crazy shit on the walls here in this apartment.
Right,
but
we're distracted by other things, but they're analog things.
Yeah, it's a world that somebody else has built, So yeah, it's the immediacy of connection,
And just the analog world. I mean, if we're just shifting over to digital, that's kind of a slippery slope. Here's some other examples. This is the most recent street poster. In Tompkins Square Park. I'm going to be giving a slide lecture next Saturday,
October 26th, if this happens to air before then.
If it happens to. Otherwise, it always comes around again. I'll be doing more in the neighborhood. But so this is an example of, I did the artwork analog, and then I printed it out on my Epson printer. I print out money on Epson. I print mostly 50s and Benjamins. But what happened after about 6 months, I noticed that I was poorer than ever. I didn't have any money in my pocket. I realized that the goddamn cartridges are so expensive on the Epson printers that I was actually losing money printing my own $100 bills.
I feel like legal tender by the B-52s.
Right. So now I'm gone back to the old-fashioned way and just using the greenbacks, the dead presidents. Drooker bucks. Hey. And the color was never quite accurate, and the texture of the paper never felt quite right anyway. But I still love putting posters on the street. And most people, even hipsters on the left, it wouldn't occur to them. They just do everything on social media, or they'll post it on their website.
Where it's just, I clicked like, therefore I've registered my approval, disapproval, whatever it is.
That's right. I signed on to it. Didn't you see? In fact, I didn't just like it. I put a little heart. I don't just like you. I love you. So I do all of that. Why not use all the tools at our disposal, right? So, but in addition to these, digital means of communication, which is fine, it's nice and quick, but we shouldn't stop doing, street posters would be an example.
Again, being on the street.
That social media is no substitute for printing it up and then wheat pasting it, or even just tacking it up on a bulletin board and doing the saturation bombing all over lower Manhattan. Because I'm convinced, I have zero scientific evidence to prove this,
Sure. Yeah.
but I suspect that when people see something in print on the street, that they're registering it in a different part of their brain. When we see something on a screen, on our iPhones or just on a flat screen, everything is, in a sense, the same on a flat screen. Everything is the same frequency, at any rate. When we see things that are analog, something that's printed on paper or chiseled into the wall,
or the murals out here,
the murals or artwork, well, sculpture, you almost have to take it seriously, especially if it's over 6 feet. If it's taller than you are, you have to take it seriously. But even if it's a street poster like this, I usually put it up nice and high. I don't put it down here. If you put it up a little higher, people
tilt their heads up a little.
They have to take it a little more serious. And the advertisers have been hip to this for decades. All the multinational corporations, they're not just online. They also have these big advertisements when you're driving on the highway, all over the city. Posters for Hollywood movies, all of Madison Avenue. They're hip. They know that this probably has excellent, not just propaganda value, but this is a way of communicating to people. That's just a highly effective, very persuasive way of communicating with people. And I'm always surprised that artists, creative people, you'd think that we would be the hipsters. You'd think Madison Avenue would be the last one to catch on. They'd have to read about Edward Bernays and do their homework. Artists, we're so, I think we don't want to be on the street. We're hoping that someday we'll make it into a gallery.
Right.
Like Jean-Michel or Keith or Kenny will be inside again, and then we're legit. Instant legitimacy when you're in a gallery. And it's true. It means sometimes they're actually giving you money. People are more likely to buy one of your originals if it's hanging on the wall of gallery than if it's wheat pasted on the street. But I don't know. I've been supporting myself over the years, just doing this kind of work. And a lot of it is on the street. And then a lot of it is I also do gallery. I also do magazine covers and things like that. And, well, what did they say, Gil? I could imagine in your voice saying that it's because it's not either or. It's also and.
It's additive.
That's right. That's right.
And again, for artists,
the best of both worlds. But I feel like artists are kind of or graphic artists anyway, are completely forgetting about printing and making hard copies and putting them on the street.
Yeah.
Not everyone looks at a computer. Lots of young people who don't have that much money. Not everyone can afford an iPhone or a computer. These are the devices we take for granted are actually inordinately expensive.
And the big challenge of the internet infinite jukebox is getting seen.
That's right.
How are they going to know to look? You have something on the subway, people are going to look up and notice it.
The advertisers, they're the hippest ones of all. They know, and they got a captive audience.
Right.
So why are we surrendering all of our public space? This is really the bottom line. The question of the day, why have we surrendered our public space to the advertising industry? It's not that they just bum rushed the walls and the billboards and yeah, they're paying to do it officially, but that's only because artists have given up. We could be defacing everyone. If Jean-Michel is able to systematically cross out each of my stencils, we could have a whole army of people going around defacing all the advertising around. And you used to see that more when I was growing up in this neighborhood. Any type of a poster on the street for cigarettes or something, or deodorant, or big woman's smiling face.
The missing
teeth.
The
mustache, or the Salvador Dali mustache, at least. Yeah, and the missing teeth.
Always a given.
You don't see that anymore. It's almost as if people have just kind of surrendered or were intimidated.
Yeah, I was going to say
we don't want to draw them out because we might get in trouble. You might get busted.
It's your panopticon.
That's vandalism. You're defacing private property.
I get you.
Either way, you're supposed to feel guilty about it. I noticed this as a teenager. Hey, you! What? Get away from there! Don't you know that that's private property? Whoa! Sorry, officer. Private is private property. But then I noticed that they would also go, "Hey, kid, get away from there! Don't you know that this is public? This is public property. This is public. Everyone has to use that." Then I realized that either way, you were screwed. Either way, it wasn't yours.
You were the undesirable.
That's right. And either way, you're supposed to keep the magic markers at home. Don't go out there and don't think that you could be participating in the conversation. This is just for professionals. On Madison Avenue, they know more about typography than you.
Interact with young artists?
I do. I've done a lot of teaching over the years. I guess I started right here at Charas, which was closed because it got bought out by some greedy landlord years ago. But then he was so greedy that he never even did the gut rehab, and it was sitting there for so long now that it's looking like the community is going to be taking the building back. Huh. And it's a big ass building. It's an old public school that built in the 1920s or something. That was the first time I started teaching art to kids, just to neighborhood kids, to whoever showed up that day, painting and drawing. Sometimes we'd get some clay, 3D art. And over the years, I've enjoyed that. I've done a lot of teaching, or Peter Cooper will invite me to be the guest lecturer at School of Visual Arts or something.
He doesn't get you up to Harvard?
Somewhere like that. No, I haven't been out to Harvard yet.
Yeah, you got to start.
That's kind of a schlep. What is it? It's like 5 hours from here to Boston.
To get to, but it's still, you got to put Harvard on your resume just to say, haha,
Boston.
I screwed them.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Cambridge. Yeah. That's right. Cambridge. Hey, MIT is there too. Yeah. I hear that Chomsky is retired though. He stepped down. He had a stroke. He was
old as dirt too. Yeah.
I think he's 96. That's really poignant. Like he had the stroke right around the time of October 7th and the Gaza invasion and all that, when Chomsky, who is the most articulate on that subject, suddenly, is no longer available. Yeah. He already wrote all these books on the subject. Over the decades, no one was really listening. He was blacklisted from the op-ed page of the New York Times. Now when people need him to just explain the history of what's going on over there, he can't. I don't know that he could speak anymore.
No one wants a history. They just want the present moment. So
we have the historical amnesia that we're famous for.
Cultural amnesia is one of my favorite books. I'll zap you a copy of that.
Cultural amnesia, yeah. I'll have to add that to my reading list.
Yeah, you'll thank me when you get rolling. But yeah, that sense of working with younger artists or trying to get across the necessity of activism, of
passing
actually
along, right? Not just the tools,
technique and craft is one thing,
but I like to give lots of examples of the content, right? Because there's always the form. That's what art schools. If an art school is halfway decent, and most of them are charged way too much money, and they're not even that good. But at best, they'll just teach you the technique. If they could teach you technique, that's pretty good. If they could teach you the form, yeah. But what about the content? No one was talking about the content. So when I'm going to be teaching a class at Cooper Union tomorrow evening, so there'll be all these young 18, 19-year-olds, and I'm going to be giving them some examples of some of the art that I did when I was even younger than they are. Yeah. When I was 15, 16, I think my first zine, of course, we didn't call them zines.
Not back then. It took to the late 80s for that. But
right. Then they were fanzines, and then they were just zines. But I don't know. We didn't call them anything then. They were just little self-published things that you mimeographed. Yeah, I was
supposed to say the mimeograph
when
was
the teacher wasn't looking. Yeah. I started self-publishing when I was 15, so I still have a couple of those on file in some filing cabinet somewhere. So I'm gonna pass those around the room, so they could see not only the revelation that hey, you could actually print something up and then give them out to your friends. You don't have to just be posting things on social media or a blog post. You could do all of that, all of the whole 9 yards, digital, everything that you're doing anyway. And in addition, just for a fun project,
Make a thing, man.
make a thing or print it out. Print it out on your Epson, the thing that you typed in. Print out a couple of dozen of them, then you can hand them out to your friends. You could hand them out to people in the subway. That's what I did at first. I would hand them out to people, or I would leave them in telephone booths when the city still had telephone booths. At a certain point, every telephone booth not only had "Pray" carved in it, but it had the white pages and the yellow pages, but they were all burnt to a crisp. Someone had torched them on fire a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
And they would stank of piss. They all had that. And the piss wasn't so bad. It was the smell of the disinfectant that they would pour on top of that made the whole thing untenable. And then they just took all the telephone booths away.
And then they just
I don't know. Did they even have the half booths anymore?
It turns out, like your squeegee man, they're there, but we never see them. If you start looking, you'll realize they're amongst us, tons of them.
But they're invisible.
We've learned not to see them because we're always looking at our phones. We never think of these, and I don't know if any of them work, but it was only a few years ago, a photographer pal of mine was doing a project of shooting telephones on the streets of New York.
Public phones, documenting
them. Their phones on the streets. Oh, they're everywhere. You just don't see them because, again,
because they're irrelevant because you have one in your pocket.
Yeah, we've got this self-induced psyop where we don't even see these things because why would we pay attention?
I miss those old analog payphones because they're always scams where you go to the hardware store. I learned this from Abby Hoffman. Steal this book. Hardware store, you get a whole box of number 16 brass washers. Put a piece of tape over one side. Drop them in the slot, and they work as dimes. The telephone thinks it's a dime. And it's the phone company anyway.
Yeah,
so screw
them.
It's not like it's some mom and pop store. They're not even going to feel it.
Different world. Reminds me of the first Superman movie when I was 6 or 7. He's running down the street. He's going to find a phone booth so he could change into Superman. Runs up, and it's one of those half booths where it's just the top, and he just looks and runs off to a revolving door and changes there.
So even by the late 70s,
they were already phasing out the booth. Yeah,
a lot of the old delicatessens in this neighborhood, and even Veselka, the Ukrainian place, one of the few that survived on 2nd Avenue. I've been going in there since I was about 7 or 8 years old. Yeah. And way in the back, it was this dimly lit room. And there were not 1, not 2, but 3 telephone booths with doors that closed, but they were old. They weren't stainless steel doors. They were wooden doors. The kind you see in old film noir movies from 1948. They still, in fact, lots of places in the neighborhood still look, it was still like had a pre-war infrastructure, especially this neighborhood, inner city neighborhoods, Lower East Side, Harlem, East New York, really didn't get with the program until what? Until 1980. That's to me, that was the quantum leap where John Lennon is just like shot in front of his apartment. And then Ronald Reagan becomes president at the same time. It was the changing of the guard. It was such a cultural shift. But but the culture and things are always naturally shifting. And then they go back and the pendulum swings this way for a few decades. And then it goes that way for a few. It's totalitarian for a while. And then it's the primitive communism for a few millennia. But this was really sudden. What happened in 1980, because again, my memory in this neighborhood, growing up in Tompkins Square Park, is that the 60s took a while to really get the flavor of the 60s. It still felt very much like a black and white world. And the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night was in black and white, and Lenny Bruce, he was in black and white. Things didn't start getting mod and colorful and psychedelic till 1966. 67, what we think of as the 60s,
really starts
was really 66, 67, 68, and then it kind of.
You're already getting to Altamont, and everything starts going downhill.
And then it kind of interpenetrated a bit. In 1971, 72, it was still felt like this. You still had the Weather Underground. You still had this going. There was still a certain amount of psychedelia, but. So the 70s didn't start to really feel like the 70s till what? James Taylor and some of that where, you'd still have long hair, but it would be like well-groomed. Or you wouldn't be wearing bell-bottoms, you'd be wearing flare slacks. It's the 70s. Jimmy Carter, in retrospect, that was maybe about as good as it got. But it felt really boring because it wasn't the 60s, it was the fucking 70s. But then we now all miss the 1970s because by 1980, on the dot, boom, it's the 80s, landed suddenly. There was nothing gradual about it. It didn't take like till 1982, 83 to get the character of the 80s. It started like January 1980, we're in a whole different era. And from what I hear in Europe, it's similar, especially in England, where Margaret Thatcher had these same austerity programs of deregulation, privatization, the same thing that we have now that all the Democrats and especially Clinton have embraced in recent decades. We're just in this neoliberal era where there's no public space to speak of. It's all, the public space has been shrunk down to the point where people are getting sentimental that the suburban malls in upstate New York, the malls are closing down. That's where, when I was a teenager,
that used to be the place we hung. Yeah,
we would hang out by the artificial fountain on a Saturday night. That it was everything was made out of Formica, and it was like totally dystopian at the time. But now, hey,
it was a public place.
It was a public place.
Semi-public place. But
they didn't rush you. You could stay as long as you liked, I think. No one bum rushed you. And then, and it was analog. People were coming and going. You were seeing your friends and hanging with them in person. You weren't just texting them. It was a whole different thing. And this is like the dystopian shopping malls of the 70s. Things have shifted pretty dramatically.
I asked, more name dropping, I asked Moby this when we recorded 2016, 2017 out in L.A. It had come up that record stores didn't exist. He's a recording artist, and everything is streaming or digital at that point. And I just said to him, the thing that kills me, like I used to go to hang out, and it was suburban, but I would go hang out at Tower Records in Paramus, New Jersey, and that's where you found records, and you heard stuff you hadn't heard before. You had the video store. I said, all that's gone. You make music ostensibly for a younger audience, but not young. I said, where are kids? He's like, they're all in their parents' houses in the basement, and they're all texting each other, and there's no one-on-one, no direct interaction.
It's like Orwell's 1984. Big Brother is watching you through the screen.
Yeah, they're all...
But now Big Brother doesn't even really need to be watching you.
So that was always
because it's the panopticon. And he knows what you're doing anyway. You're at home watching the screen.
But that was Brave New World versus 1984, where it turned out everybody was willing to I'll bring it into my house. I want this thing, following me everywhere.
With Aldous Huxley. Now, have you ever seen, I stumbled upon, just on a copy lying on the street of this book called, I think it was called Brave New World Revisited. It was by Aldous Huxley.
But never read it.
It's a collection of essays that I guess he was having published in the late 40s and 50s. And he's comparing, after World War II and after George Orwell had died, which things Orwell get right in his book and which things were more accurate with Brave New World, which after all was written earlier, 10 years before that. His dystopia was that everyone was heavily drugged, but they were feeling good.
Yeah,
everyone was getting
with
pharmaceuticals, and he was really predicting everything from LSD to Viagra back in the 1930s. Aldous was, and then so certain chapters are saying no, but it's actually far more coercive now. I think George got this right.
Yeah.
Certain things, so it's actually
the times changed. The Cold War changed a lot, and then what we consider post-Cold War becomes a very different way of approaching this stuff.
It's a little of both. Certain things, I guess the media, right, is you don't have to be Noam Chomsky to analyze that the media is beyond anything Orwell could have predicted just with the advent of television, not to mention the internet. I mean, Joseph Goebbels, he didn't have television for propaganda. He had newsreel footage.
And radio.
And they took that way more seriously than the liberals did. The fascists, They would hire the best art. They wanted Fritz Lang to be the minister of the cinema.
That was was at the time for me to leave. Okay.
Time for leave. I got to be going, Adolf. I'll be right back. Let me think about this overnight. Takes the next boat to Hollywood. Yeah. So the next best thing, he settles for Leni Riefenstahl to be his filmmaker. So Hitler, he knew how important the arts were in affecting the public consciousness, we'll just say.
So tell me about Naked City. Tell me what you want an audience to get from Naked City.
More about Naked City. So
tell me about the role of art, I guess.
Yeah, well, and that's always challenging, isn't it, when we're talking about visual art over the radio or over a podcast here. These days, they call it a podcast even when the guy's videotaping you.
Oh, yeah. Everything is a podcast.
I thought this was, no, but I'm also going to stream it on YouTube. But I'm just calling it a podcast.
Like I always say, if any of us look good on screen, this isn't the job we would be in.
No. That's right. That's right. So, but it's challenging to describe what the pictures look like over.
No, but you've got a fluid.
Here, let's hold the pictures up to the microphone so the viewers at home could see what we're talking about.
It's a real fluid visual style. You developed something different than what you were doing previously with these. I guess it's my question of, how we talked about that learning curve in terms of visual storytelling, but whether you plan on incorporating this stuff, whether you're working on, the fourth book in the City trilogy, or, if there's other projects you're keeping in mind. Yeah, in addition to street art.
I am, as a matter of fact. We won't dwell on it, but
don't jinx anything.
I'm not that superstitious like many artists we know.
Yeah.
No, the next book that I was even working on concurrently, it's also a book about growing up down on the Lower East Side during that era before the neoliberal era kicked in. But it has a lot more writing in it. There's like a collection of essays that then go with paintings, all of those paintings that I've done for the New Yorker over the years. So I realized I have a whole body of work that's ready to go now. All it needs is to be fleshed out a little bit with some words describing, what was going on when I did this painting. What is this street poster about? So it's everything from the street posters from Tompkins Square Park to the covers of the New Yorker, right? Kind of hitting them high and low. And I've always enjoyed to the present day, to this very week. Yeah, check out New Yorker tomorrow morning, Gil. But at the same time, wheat pasting, paper on the street, hitting them with that analog, on an analog level. And then, of course, people will be reading the magazine. They'll be reading the hard copy, though I suspect that most of the readers of the New Yorker by now are probably just looking at it on their tablets.
I get it in print. I read it online. I feel bad, but that's, I'll sit down with my laptop and have a couple of New Yorker articles.
I guess they're looking at it on their Kindles or what. This is not just the New Yorker, but all print
that's
media.
The way print is gone.
One thing that to be said for the New Yorker is that they're virtually the only magazine left, weekly magazine or monthly publication left that still allows artists on their cover.
Yeah.
So
photography is cheaper.
But it happened very incrementally. People didn't realize, but then Norman Rockwell died. That whole generation died. And but photography on the cover of all of these publications. Why? Photography has been with us from the 19th century. Why is it just replacing all of the Saturday Evening Post? And Harper's occasionally will have some painting on the cover, but it's mostly photography now. Wherever you look, photography. So I tell people, don't get all worked up about artificial intelligence. Visual artists, we're still reeling from this new technology that came out a while back called photography. Has already done artists out of a gig. I mean, we're still reeling from that. Yeah. Those of us who are more creative or abstract artists said, well, yes, the photograph, it captures only the external appearance of things, and is now liberated painters from painting the inner
no representational stuff. We can now do
all of that. Cubism and surrealism was kind of a response to the fact that there's this machine has just been invented that does your job in like a split second. There it is. We'll put it right on the magazine cover. Why pay an artist to work on something for 48 hours or a week? Or the New Yorker covers, I'll typically spend a solid week working on it, when you could pay a photographer to spend a few seconds. Well, hey, to my photographer friends, I know you took many hundreds of photos,
composition
you
and
selected
color correction
this one,
and everything else,
et cetera, et cetera. However, it's not quite the same thing when you're using the man's technology. Hey, some of my best friends are photographers.
We'll take a couple of pictures after this, man.
Yeah, we got to take a group shot.
Yeah. Plus, I need to shoot something for my weird
a double
art book.
selfie here in the Museum of Reclaimed Urban Space on Avenue C.
I will say I'm glad to have experienced it. I'm glad you can, A, you got back out to New York for this, and B, that you managed to bring me into the Lower East Side, and we're still going to call it the Lower East Side and not the East Village.
You and I could still call it that. People down here still call it that. Puerto Ricans, the Dominicans in the neighborhood still call it Lower East Side. Yeah.
I figure we'll take a couple of pictures in Tompkins. And
we could walk through Tompkins Square. Yeah, do you have any final questions or
no? I mean, we
comments
tackled,
or criticisms?
We tackled far more
Gil?
than I thought we were going to tackle, but we did get to Naked City, which is important, and just the idea that you're growing up now and you can finally use word balloons, and I'm proud of you, man.
Yes, I'm finally feeling a little more comfortable with using verbal language, and they've insinuating themselves into my storytelling. And for those of you who have ever been through Tompkins Square Park, the park is very much a part of the story. In fact, it really winds up. Yeah. That's not a spoiler.
No, but it
winds up.
Beautifully.
The last few pages are there in Tompkins Park, because that is a special place to me. It's celebrating its 190th year right now, and anniversary, and until the decade or two back, it was open 24/7. Now the curfew, they kick everyone out at midnight, but that's only because people aren't pushing back. If enough of the community started pushing back, they would have to leave it open, or they would at least have to give the local residents a key to the park, like they do with Gramercy Park.
Yeah, that's a little different world.
Yeah, that's a little different world. But hey, no, you gave the Gramercy Park neighborhood residents a special key. They could come and go from Gramercy Park anytime they want to. It's our turn.
I say we head down. Thanks so much for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Gil.
And that was Eric Drooker. Go get his new book, Naked City, from Dark Horse Books. It's an amazing piece of graphic storytelling by an absolute master of the form. Very heartfelt story, very much a piece about what it means to make art in this day and age. You should also visit Eric's site, drooker.com, for more about his books, comics, illustration work, appearances, how to buy original art, and more. And that's DROOKER.com. He's also on Instagram as eric.drooker and on Facebook as edrooker, all one word. I have links to all that in the show and episode notes for this one. Now, I do want to tell you something that happened after we recorded. I had to get the L train across town so I could get the 2 and the 3 up to 96th Street. And when I was on the L, I was standing, and there was a guy standing across from me. Black guy, had a burger chain T-shirt on. He was coming to or from work. And he had some tattoos. He had 3 crosses behind and below his right ear. I noticed those first. And then I noticed at the base of his throat, he had a tattoo reading "Pray" in script, P-R-A-Y. So after everything Eric had told me about how every subway once upon a time had "Pray" and "Fuck you" on it, I had to email him when I got home and let him know that the subways still have "Pray." Now, you can support the Virtual Memories Show by telling other people about it. Let them know there's this podcast comes out every single week with great conversations with really fascinating culture makers and other figures in the arts world. You can also help out the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it, or who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or comic or piece of music, theater, art exhibition, museum, whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by sending me an email, DM if we're connected on Instagram or Blue Sky, postcard or letter. I do a newsletter twice a week. That's got my mailing address at the bottom of it. It's buttondown.com/email/VMSpod. Sign up for that. You'll find my mailing address. You can send me something that way. Or you can use my Google Voice number. And that's 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long. So you can go longer than that. It'll cut you off. Just call back, leave another message. And let me know if it'd be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something interesting to share with the listeners, but I'd never run something like that without the speaker's permission, so let me know. Now, if you got money to spare, don't give it to me. I'm going to start a Kickstarter later this year or in January around the book that I'm making of photography, Instax photography around the podcast that I've done in 2024. But that's a separate thing. Right now, if you've got money to spare, help other people and help other institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Crowdfunder, Indiegogo, Patreon, Kickstarter, places like that, where you'll find people who need help making rent, making medical bills, car payments, veterinary bills, getting an artistic project rolling. There's people out there who just a few dollars could make a real difference in their lives. So, please try to give. Now, with institutions, I give to my local food bank and World Central Kitchen every month, make occasional election contributions, which I guess I'll let up on after today. But there are things you can do. There's Planned Parenthood and Women's Choice. There are freedom funds. There are all sorts of institutions out there that a couple of dollars from you might help make a difference in the world. So I hope you'll give. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. Now, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.